Hello, I'm Leanne from Leanne Teaches English, and today I am going to be talking about the 10 top challenges that Spanish speakers face when learning English. So, not to say all Spanish speakers have these problems, but in my experience teaching English for 10 years now, these are the things that I've noticed. So the first thing is, in Spanish, it's obviously not necessary to include the subject, right? So you could say something like, tengo 28 años. For example, you don't have to say yo tengo, right? You can just say tengo because we all understand that tengo means I. Whereas in English, we can't do this. We always have to include the subject. So I am 28 years old. Now, the two examples where I see this the most would be with translating is or are or was or were, be verb basically. So a lot of my Spanish speaking students, when they're speaking English, will say things like, oh, is very interesting. Because in Spanish, you can just say es muy interesante. But in English, you have to say it is very interesting, okay? Or in the past tense, maybe they'll say something like, oh, was a really great day. But you can't just say was, you have to say it was a really great day. Or you could specify, you could say the day was really great. So it will always represent something that's singular, okay? So that's the first thing. The second thing I want to talk about is the pronunciation of Edie. So I do think the best way to learn Edie is just listen and repeat, okay? But that's not always as simple as it sounds, right? So yes, there are some rules. And the three rules that I'm going to talk about kind of make sense, because if we take a verb, for example, decide ends in a d sound. And when a verb ends in a d sound, the ed changes to kind of like an id sound. So we say, I decided. Okay, so this id sound happens when any verb ends in a d sound or a t sound. So for example, want, wanted. Okay. If you have a verb, for example, jump, notice that final sound is voiceless. There's no activation of the vocal cord. So then we say jumped, and the ed is a t sound, jumped, pushed, for example. Okay, so anything that ends in a voiceless sound like p, or for example, k or f, any of those voiceless sounds, okay? And then the last one is any verb that ends with a voiced sound, okay? So for example, if we look at the verb try, I sound like I'm singing. The final sound is a voiced sound, right? And so then the ed becomes a d. So we say tried, played, okay, cleaned. So it's actually just more comfortable for English speakers, and I think over a long time this is what's happened. And so just something to be aware of. Yes, you can practice, but of course, listening and repeating probably is the best way to learn. The next thing I want to talk about is the schwa. Now, I love to talk about the schwa, and it always surprises me how few people really know what the schwa is. So schwa is a sound, and that sound is a. And that is the most common sound in English. It does not have a letter in the alphabet specifically. There's no schwa letter. But often our vowels, A, E, I, O, U, and sometimes a Y, are pronounced like a schwa, an a. It's a very lazy sound. And it tends to happen if a vowel is in a position that is not stressed. So to give you an example, focus. Focus. The stress is, first of all, focus. That U is not U, it's not focus, it's focus, focus. It is difficult to focus in class. Item, we don't say item, we say item, item. The next example is cousin, not cousin, cousin. Okay, so we get a schwa in two places there. And then the last example I have is formal. Formal, not formal, 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 okay? So the natural question is, well, how do I know? How do I know when a vowel is pronounced like a schwa? You don't. If it's a new word, it can be really, really difficult or almost impossible to know if a particular sound is pronounced as a schwa. You can listen to people and repeat. You can look in the dictionary, and often in a dictionary, schwa is written as an upside down E. So in the dictionary, they'll write the word with the, the regular alphabet, and then often next to it, they'll write the word again with the phonetic alphabet, and the upside down E represents the schwa sound. So you could look at it that way as well. And then I think also once you learn enough English, you start to kind of predict, like if there's a new word, you'll be like, ugh, that doesn't really sound right. I think that would be more like an sound, right? That comes with time, but I think eventually after, a lot of experience, you start to be able to figure out where a schwa would go, right? So that's schwa. Next thing is the pronunciation of S. So in English, the letter S, we say S, but the pronunciation is S. So it's not S spaghetti, it's not S spoon, it's spaghetti, spoon. Just like the word yes in Spanish, si, you don't say esi, it's just si. So it's that same sound with an S. Okay. The next thing is make versus do. So students often ask me this question and they say, teacher, what's the difference between make and do? And yes, there's kind of a rule. Oh, if you make something, you create something. And if you do something, you're just doing it, you do the action. But to be honest, I think there are a lot of irregularities. So what I say is just memorize the combinations, the collocations. So we make breakfast. We do makeup. So you can say, I do my makeup in the morning. You make a wish, do research, make a decision, do well. I hope you do well in your future job, right? Don't even think, why make? Why do you just have to memorize them? Okay. Unless you want to sit down and study them. I mean, you could do that. And I do maybe recommend that if you go to Google and type in collocations with make and do, you'll get a lot of images or websites, and you could choose 5 and focus on those. Absolutely. You obviously have to be pretty, regimented and disciplined to do that. And I think that's a great, daily habit to have, but it's not always sustainable to do that, right? Or realistic. Okay. So the next thing is he, she, him, her, his, hers. What am I talking about here? Okay, so for a man or anyone who identifies as a man, you would say he, right? So you can say he is Canadian. If you want to use the masculine in the object position, you say him. So you can say I like him. Okay. If you want to use a possessive, I would say, oh, this is lipstick. So maybe this is his lipstick, right? Or you could say this is his. Okay. And then same thing if it's a woman or someone who identifies as a woman, you would say she is my friend, I like her, this is her lipstick, or this is hers. Okay. So I know that can be confusing for a Spanish speaker because in Spanish it sort of, yes, you have él y ella, but then basically everything else is su, or if it's his and hers, like this is his, this is hers, it would be like suyo or suya. So much, in Spanish, you have 1 or 2 words for 6 words in English, okay? The next thing are false friends. So this happens in every language, but it's when you take a word and you translate it into English, and that word does exist in English, but it has a different meaning. So for example, I often hear students say things like, oh, I really want to approve the exam. So aprobar, excuse my pronunciation, in Spanish is the correct verb, but in English we pass an exam, okay? Another one is maybe in English, a Spanish speaker will say, oh, she's a very sensible person. She's a very sensible, or he's a very sensible person. I'm very sensible. And what they mean is sensitive, right? Sensitive is if you're quite, your emotions are quite strong and you're quite, sensitive to things. So like maybe if somebody's quite sensitive, maybe you're a little bit softer with them, right? You wouldn't say things maybe quite so honestly because maybe they're going to get upset or offended quite easily. So sensible translates to sensitive in English, okay? Sensible means someone who's like very responsible and they don't do stupid things and like quite logical and practical. Yeah, so basically the opposite of like I don't want to say a person who's not sensible. Okay, next one is when you're talking in the present in English, he, she, and it needs an S or sometimes ES. Now, I think almost every Spanish speaker knows this, but it's just very easy to forget. And if you don't say it, if you say, for example, he speak English, of course we understand, but it's like, ugh, oh, that sounds weird, right? Or maybe you wouldn't even think that. You just think like, oh, in your mind, you might hear, he speaks English. Right, so he speaks English, she speaks English, it costs $10, right? So just be careful with he, she, and it. And remember, it is representing a singular thing, okay? A singular thing. So quite common. Next is using present simple for the future. In English, we don't generally use present simple for the future. We can if it's something scheduled, but really in present simple, we can also talk about habits and routines and schedules. So yeah, you might say, oh, the flight leaves at 10 a.m. on Friday morning because that flight leaves at 10 a.m. on Friday morning every single week, right? So yes, in that situation. But when you're talking about plans and things in the future, generally we'll use be going to and present continuous. So for example, I am going to study tomorrow. I'm studying tomorrow. Or we also have will. Will has more specific uses, right? So I'll study tomorrow sounds more like a promise or a commitment. So for general plans, be going to and the present continuous are the most common, okay? But I wouldn't be using present simple. For example, I wouldn't say, oh, tomorrow I go and see my friend. You have to say, I'm going to see my friend, or I'm going to go and see my friend, okay? And the last one are auxiliary verbs. So in English, if you want to make a sentence negative or you want to ask a question, most of the time, like I don't know what percentage, but a high percentage of the time you have to use an auxiliary verb. Okay, so this is something quite specific to English, and our auxiliary verbs are do, be, have, and then the modal verbs, so should, would, could, can. So if you say, for example, I speak English, but then you want to make a negative, you need an auxiliary verb. So because it's present simple, I would say, oh, I don't speak English. If I want to ask a question, do you speak English? If I say something in the past and say, oh, I spoke Spanish, I didn't speak Spanish. Did you speak Spanish? So negatives and questions, you need to use your auxiliary verbs, okay? Now with modal verbs, of course, modal verbs, we can use them in positive sentences too. So I should go, I shouldn't go, should you go? So modal verbs, we also use them in the affirmative. And then I'll also talk about be and have. So be and have, of course, we use those in the affirmatives too. So we can say, I am Canadian, I am not Canadian, are you Canadian? Or I have been to Italy, I haven't been to Italy, have you been to Italy? So do and does and did, we only use with the negative and with questions. So that's it. I know I went through those pretty quickly, but if I explained all of them in great detail, we'd be here for a long time. If you would like any help, leave me a comment, ask me a question. I'm happy to help. If you want to send me a video, you can with a question. That's absolutely fine. Of course, this was just more of a sort of introduction. You could go into a lot more details with all of these things. So yeah, that's going to be it. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you guys soon. Bye.